Welcome to A Little TLC, the podcast where we embark on an enlightening journey through the ever-evolving world of education. I'm your host, Heather Volchko, and I'm on a mission to empower educators and change makers to skillfully navigate the intricacies of serving our most exceptional students. Every month, we'll be exploring a unique and timely theme in a mini-series format, whether we're digging into inclusive teaching practices, addressing student mental health challenges, or exploring the intricate connection between our personal and professional lives. Each month offers an in-depth exploration of weekly topics that truly matter. I hope you're ready to be both challenged and inspired because this is A Little TLC. Cool. So we are back for the next week here. Last week we were talking about that inclusive culture, that is, the organizational dynamics, and so a lot of this month we've been just talking about leadership. And so we kind of hinted at it the first week, also kind of walked around it a little bit last week. This week we are just diving straight into decoding leadership dynamics. So what are those leadership moves? How do we do what we do to either create those dynamics or sometimes even upend the dynamics that are around us in a way that's actually useful in creating that inclusive culture and to really lead the organization that we are responsible for. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes, Matthew.
Yeah, same here. I know there's so many different approaches to leadership, so many different perspectives. It plays a different role in a person's life based on their own experience.
Yes.
So there's so much that we can dive into. Where do you want to start?
Well, I think something that we've been sort of just talking around a lot is just what is leadership? I
Mm.
think we've talked about organizations. We've talked about, like last week we were talking about there's choices that we make, and those choices are behaviors, and the result of our behaviors can hopefully be inclusive, or like maybe it's not, right? How do we actually do those things? Like that's the mechanics of it. But I think I don't remember if it was the first week or the second week. You had even just shared a story where you were talking about, leading just by the virtue of kind of how you interact. You don't
Yeah,
necessarily need a label or a title or a position. It's just a manner of interacting. And so I think to
yeah,
me, that's the dynamics of it, right? Like there you can do fancy research and have bells and whistles, but the dynamics of it is just the interactions.
yeah. Very simply, I would make it one word: leadership is influence. Like the ability to move the needle, to impact people, to drive change, to shift perspectives, to make certain. I'll give you a simple story example. When I was a kid, all the kids kind of in the neighborhood that we grew up in, we played basketball, but there was only one kid who actually had a basketball. So when we went to the basketball court, you know who had influence? The
Right.
kid with basketball. And he got to pick the teams and he got to shoot first. And when something didn't go his way, he took his ball and went home. Right. Like he wasn't a leader, he wasn't older, he had no position, but he had influence just based
Hmm.
on that specific scenario. But even in other environments, I mean, it's really, I love how you frame things that it's not about the position, it's about the connection, really,
Yeah.
right? Um, so if I was to add maybe one more word to that, the way that my mentor always taught it to me is that leadership is example,
Hmm.
right? Like, what example am I setting, right? And when I have the right values that kind of drive me as a leader, then I set the right example. And when I set the right example of confidence and integrity, well, now I have influence as a byproduct, right? Because as a leader, people may not always like you, but if you're a good leader, they will respect you. They will fall in line with you. They will follow you. Yeah, and I've seen this even in my own businesses where I've had to give challenging feedback or I've had to tell people, hey, we needed to do it this way. But because I do it in a way where it's like, but tell me how we got here and tell me what I can do to support you so that we can move forward. They they take the feedback, they understand why I'm giving it to them because it's not Matthew attacking the person,
Hmm.
it's a teammate helping a teammate accomplish the goal.
Right.
And when I can kind of take that step back, realize, hey, if I'm setting the right example with the right integrity, and now I can create influence, now I can lead. Because leadership also requires permission,
Yes.
right? If
Thank
I'm
you.
leading by force, I'm not a leader. I'm something else. I'm a bit of a dictator, right? And I know that's something we've talked about before too. Is like, there are different approaches to leadership,
Yeah.
right? Like you can be very authoritarian, where you demand and you're critical, and we got to get this by this deadline and this time frame and do it this way, and it's very specific. And it can drive results and it can drive performance. But like we talked about, I think the first week is that it also creates a lot of turnover because people don't like that. Nobody likes feeling out of control. No one likes feeling demanded or commanded around. They want to feel like they contribute. And then there's another approach, right? Transformational leadership, where they're able to share a vision and they encourage innovation, they provide support. And those type of leaders, they create very collaborative and trusting environments. But then there's also a third, which I think kind of is one of my favorites, if I'm being honest with you. But it's also the hardest, which is servant leadership, where I actually show up for you, right? I'm not just casting a vision. I'm not just telling you what needs to get done. I'm helping you along the way. I sit right beside you at the table, right? And I serve you. And I got such beautiful examples of that, even in my own life. Like I remember 2 years ago, I was part of a business team. And during that phase in my life, my dad unexpectedly went into a coma. And I currently live in Virginia. My dad was living in Florida at the time. And I was also working on some stuff in my career. I had a super power packed, pressure filled calendar. And all of a sudden, my dad is on life support. And I have to go down and spend a couple weeks there in Florida taking care of him while, he's on a lung bypass machine and all this stuff is going on. And rather than getting just a text message or an email from the team that I was a part of, one of the leads on their own dime flew down from DC to Florida to spend the day and come to the hospital. One of the other people, I have a Christian background, just my personal faith. And one of the other people, him and his wife called me and they said, "Hey, can you take your phone and can you put it on your dad's shoulder while he's in the coma?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why?" And I'm like, "What's going on? Like, what's up?" And literally for 10 to 15 minutes, that man and his wife took turns praying into my father's ear. Right. And stuff like that, they're not going to write that on their performance plan. They're not going to write that in their notable mentions for their resume, but that's just who they are. And when you as a leader understand that I operate under a certain approach to life, and that as a servant leader, my focus is the people that I work with. I am a servant of theirs. They don't serve me. Then I make different decisions. I show up differently. I prioritize differently. And I'm willing to exhaust myself because my focus is you. So this whole conversation of leadership and inclusivity and kind of dynamics and decoding it, so much comes back to personal character, values, and morals. Because at the end of the day, no matter what position you're in, for whatever company you're working with, it's you who's there. And what are my values and what are my morals and what drives me as a person? Because whatever drives me as an individual is going to show itself and exemplify itself in my leadership.
Yeah, and I mean, even that extension of the leadership is the decisions that we make. And if
Yeah.
it's a decision of, a very task-based, yes or no to this or that, or it's just how I'm choosing to interact with you or this group in this moment, I mean, those are the dynamics. And I think a lot of the work that I've done, and I've done that right, next to you in some of these spaces, is
Yeah.
saying, I hear what you're saying, but I'm also seeing what you're doing. And I don't know that they're both communicating the same thing. And so which dynamic is going to win out in that moment with your people, right? So, it's one thing to just say the right things or whatever you think might be the right thing. It's another thing to actually do some of these things and what that looks like. And then, I mean, like we always talk about actions speak louder than words, right? A common, kind of phrase. But in reality, is if I'm looking at someone else and I'm trying to make sense of them, yes, I'm going to hear what they're saying, but I'm also going to watch what they're doing because in my worldview, that tends to be more at the, gut level. What do you actually think is those, how you're acting, and what
Yeah.
those choices are. And then that is what's having the ripple effect out into the culture of the spaces that we have influence in.
Are you ready to choose a transformative learning journey that allows you to absorb, reflect, and apply new knowledge at your own pace? This week is Workshop Week at TLC. Join us for a collection of pre-recorded, immersive learning experiences designed to empower you with practical skills and moments of introspection. Our workshops tend to be the perfect blend of structured learning and personal growth. Each session includes dedicated time for reflection and application, so you can truly internalize what you've learned. But that's not all. By becoming a member of the TLC Network, you gain access to professionals committed to walking this experience together. Learners get access to valuable webinars, enriching workshops, and engaging guest hangouts. Supporters gain access to our vibrant online community, monthly Q&A sessions, and joint discussions in a little PLC. Clever, right? Either way, you'll be among the first to access our podcast and blog pairing every week. Don't miss this unique opportunity to engage in some self-discovery and personal growth. Join us and see the positive impact this week's workshop can have on your life.
But I think I love how you're framing, you've got the authoritative part, you've got that transformative part, you've got kind of that service aspect that I think can kind of almost like bobble back and forth between, where there's moments where we need to be directive and there's moments that we need to cast vision, but that we're doing that, we can do both of those things in a way that now I'm in it with you. And so it doesn't matter how I'm kind of like, directing or transforming what may be going on. I'm also in this with you. We're making this happen together. It's like a different positionality,
Yeah.
even within leadership itself.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important piece of knowing my role and just how important it is. Not my role in terms of what do I need to get done, but knowing the role I play in other people's lives. I remember reading a stat recently that your manager has a greater impact on your life than your therapist does.
Yeah.
And just when I read that, I was like, oh my God, that's so true, because you see them way more and they impact your life way more tangibly. And it's just like when I realized that as a leader, I'm impacting someone's entire family. Because if I treat them a certain way at work, well, they'll take that back home and maybe treat their spouse differently, maybe talk to their kids differently. And like the way that I show up as a leader is impacting a generation in someone else's family. And so that's why I say so often that leadership isn't positional, it's personal, right? It's influence, it's example, because I don't have to be the boss to be a leader. I just have to be someone who's compassionate and empathetic, and people want to follow you. Right. And just understanding that one thing my mentor taught me is that good leaders never miss opportunities to cast vision. And that's something that I've always worked so hard to apply, because even this morning, for example, I'm on a coaching call with some people that I work with. And before we hang up the call, I commend someone on the work that they did this week. And I saw, you did such a good job. And they're like, yeah, but I didn't do good enough. And I was like, well, what makes you say that? Right. And kind of we talked about that last time, that little phrase there. What makes you say that? Go back and check it out if you haven't. But I asked them to share a little bit more. And they're having this self-defeating dialogue internally of, yeah, I did something, but it wasn't good enough. And I say, hold on, let's take a pause here. Let's take a quick pause. Always remember, it's 100% success mentality. That when you do the thing you were supposed to do, that's the best that you could do. And the results, we're going to figure out the results. The byproduct, we'll figure those pieces out. But you did what you were responsible for. That's all I asked of you. And that's all that you're capable of doing. So you did a great job. And like in those moments, I've had spaces in my life where I've kind of shared something like that with a leader, hoping that they would catch on to it and encourage me. And they just said, yeah, we'll figure it out next time.
Oh, ouch.
Just hang up, right? And then you're left with your own thoughts. So that's one thing that I so value my mentor for teaching me is, the good leaders never miss an opportunity to cast a vision, not just for an organization, not just for a goal with a deadline, but for a person's future. Right. And that's something I even learned from Dr. King. Right. He's, one of the greatest orators and someone who, when you look at his monument in Washington, D.C., it's the Stone of Hope. Right. He's known for always being able to inspire hope in the hearts of his listeners. And I remember one time reading that broken down as an equation when I was studying his mountaintop speech. And he talks about, I've seen the mountaintop. I may not get there with you. We have a long road ahead, but and then he goes into casting that vision. Yeah. But the role of a good leader is I always ground myself in kind of two big pieces, which is reality plus possibility equals hope. Right? The reality is, hey, we've got a long road ahead and I may not be there with you. Right? That's real. possibility, but I've seen the mountaintop. I know what's coming. And therefore, the listeners feel hopeful about where they can go. So, always having that moment of sometimes I see so many leaders only talk about reality. This is the deadline. This is the goal. This is the gap. This is why the schedule slipped. This is why this happened. Who's going to figure it out? Versus this is what's going on. Hey, I know that we have such a competent team of people. You are one of the best people I know to be able to solve things like that. Can I delegate this task to you? Do you feel comfortable with that? Hey, and I know that you're one of the sharpest people with communicating and pulling things together. Can you help me figure out this and ideate some options, right? And together, I know that in the next 2-3 months, we'll be able to accomplish this and move past something we could have never even imagined, right? And like never losing those moments to really bring the best out of people, because that's my role, is to make people feel better about who they are, feel like they contribute at a high level. And as a full organization, we move closer and closer to where we're trying to accomplish.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and it's making me, I think I'm kind of like being surprised at how many connections I'm making, even with just some of the work that we do at TLC,
Yeah.
because we're constantly pulled into chaos. We wouldn't be there if it was working well, right? So like there's clearly
Yeah.
something up. And it's literally, we call it like threefold hope. Where it is, we are going to honor and acknowledge the fact that there is stuff happening, and that is why we are here, right? That is the reality of the situation. And we're not gonna, upplay, downplay. That is just what it is. But we've also been here, like, we've walked this, you're not scaring us away, this isn't too big, like, there are options, there are opportunities, and it is something that you yourself can actually walk through as well, and that we can walk that with you, and yeah, then it's gonna keep going, right? Like, we're gonna fade ourselves out of there, and you're gonna keep it happening, right? Like, and that's okay, but I've never framed it in exactly that way, in the sense of like, yeah, we honor the reality of the situation, but we can also cast that vision to say, "Hey, it doesn't have to be this way." I know in my role, a lot of times that means I'm working with staff to say, yeah, I hear you. This is rough, right? Like, not okay. And this is hard stuff. But there are some strategies, there's some angles, there might be some options here that we can go with, right? I can meet with a kid and be like, dude, if your team gave up on you, we wouldn't be here. Right. Like the fact that we're here, they're signing up to do some work. So can you like give them some grace and let them try some weird stuff and let's see if it works for you and give them some feedback on it. Right. And then also to work with the families and say, hey, like your school hasn't completely tossed in yet because like they've chosen to reach out. Like we're here, we're trying to figure it out. Can you work with us so that we can try to close some of this like school to home gaps? That we're literally working on all three fronts to say yes to what it is right now and create that little bit of like a hey, but there might be a potential here. There might be some options here and really like work in that direction. I never
Yeah.
framed it in the way that you framed it, but that's exactly what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, you highlight something else that I don't think a lot of people pay attention to, is that you talked about building relationships,
Yeah.
but so often I see a leader only build relationships with the people they lead. But what
Oh,
you just highlighted is that I can't effectively lead my people if I don't know what else is going on, if I don't actually have resources to connect them with. So, as a leader, if I want to help them most and serve them, I also need to be building relationships with other people and other organizations and spaces that don't directly connect to me, but they can connect to the people I'm serving. So, that's such a great point that you bring up.
well, but that connects too because you were talking about just you don't have to have a title to be a leader, right? How many
Yeah.
times have I said, okay, who are my go-to people? And I basically get the org chart and it's like, okay, cool, got it. But who actually runs the place, right? Like whose voice matters? Whose voice do people listen to? Not who has the title to be listened to, but really
Mhm.
within the dynamics of what's going on. Who are your key players? And that could be a whole, bunch of different, ways they could be key players. But those are leaders, right?
Yeah.
Like with or without title, it's who has that influence.
Yeah, it makes me think of a old John Maxwell training that I'd gone to, and he talked about taking over a church. And it was as he was young and just brand new in his, I think, 20s or 30s. He just became the pastor of this church, and he wanted to go into it, but there was an old guy who was in his 60s who always sat in the back row, the back pew, and no matter what the pastor would do from the stage, people would always do what that old guy who'd been at the church for 20
Mm,
years told them, right? And his first role as the new leader was to create an ally in the current leader.
yep.
And exactly that it's not always the position, but finding the environment, cultivating the culture, building the right groundwork for people to actually blossom and grow together.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're smooth transition into next week for sure, because next week is all about team building, leadership strategies, and it's those dynamics, right? It's knowing who we are as leaders, knowing what, either formal or unofficial leaders are in our midst, and then how do we partner with them through and toward whatever that vision may be.
Hey, before you jump back into your busy life, we want to invite you to head over to thresholdlearning.org, your one-stop destination for all things TLC. Here you'll find our blog with this episode's show notes, our ever-expanding bookshelf of resources, and anything else we've talked about. Trust us, there's a ton of benefits waiting for you to explore. Just head over to thresholdlearning.org, click on network, and we'll see you on the inside. Sharing the podcast with your colleagues is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at Threshold Learning TLC on Facebook and Instagram. A personal recommendation is by far the best way to share the podcast. Let them know they can listen on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere else they catch their podcasts. Just be sure to leave a rating and review on your favorite platform. You can email us at info@thresholdlearning.org. We always enjoy connecting with fellow educators and champions for educational justice. You can find everything you're looking for at thresholdlearning.org. See you there.